And what exactly did he prove during that debate, during that discussion or debate, whatever it is? What do you think? What do you think he did in that discussion? If you call it a debate. If you call it a debate, okay, what do you think he did? What was his great point against me, for example?
He made you have any debate.
Explain it to me. Explain it to me. No, since you make claims about how I got destroyed, explain it to me.
It is simply utilitarian. I'm going to use that word again. That a society which has free individuals and no slavery is ultimately much happier, much more progressive, much more productive, as we see in the West. We have made much more production and much more progress than Islamic societies have made in 500 years. Than it is to have a system of slaves.
Right there. So you appeal to the productiveness. You appeal to the productiveness of the West.
Of course, I did.
I mean, you mentioned the quality of life in the West and the progress that the West has made, and that shows how people are happier in the West today than they are in other places in the world. And you had said earlier that this is because of values, Western values, liberal values. Why is it the case that you have many countries in the world, such as in Eastern Europe, in South America, in parts of Africa, that have adopted these values? Because they're not Muslim, these are non-Muslim countries, but they suffer from poverty, from economic depression, despite the fact that they have these values of liberalism, freedom, and equality. How do you explain that? If it's just values, that results in progress and advancement, then what else?
I wouldn't think it's just values that do that. I would think values are a big part of that, and considering that Western society was built on these values. Although when Western society has pursued those values with the interruption of the Christian dominance and the Catholic Church, which was eventually opposed and defeated by the reforms, by Protestantism, and eventually by the Enlightenment. Western society has been built on these values and has existed with these values for 2,000 years.
2,000 years?
Of course, I would argue that Western society has come to the point that it has been successful.
I thought you were an atheist, not a Christian. You think the values of the West originated with Christianity 2,000 years ago?
No. I'm speaking of when we speak of Western values in history and in society, we're speaking of the Greek and the Roman origins of society. Western society was not unique in that. Western society was not one entity. Western society spread as an empire and forced other geographically Western societies to change and to adopt the Western values, which we nowadays call Western values. We base these Western values on old Greek philosophical ideas, on values of the Roman Empire, on later Christianity, and finally on Enlightenment values. This is what Western values are about. You could consider Christianity as part of that or not. I would personally say that Christianity is a part of that, but that Christianity is also you don't have to credit Christianity for it, but it is part of it, yeah.
So then what about these other Christian countries, like I said, who have also been Christian for centuries, and they have had access to the Enlightenment values, but they are suffering economically? They haven't, in 100 years, over 100 years of having constitutions and democracies and freedom of speech and all of these values, they are still suffering and they haven't developed.
Which countries? Give me an example.
Look at any country in Eastern Europe. Look at Ukraine. Look at even, some would say, any country in South America, Central America.
Eastern European countries are not entirely based on Western values, which is why we don't group them. When we group cultural groups, we don't group them as the West. We group them as East or Eastern Europe. That's because they were partially separated, both at the beginning and also especially after the adoption of Christianity. These two cultures were separated by the schism of Christianity between West and East, and Western cultures such as all the Central European cultures, Western European cultures, have stayed loyal, have been built upon much more on the ideas of old Greek philosophy and than the Roman Empire than the Eastern part. The Eastern part has grown for at least 500 years separately than the Western.
How about Greece itself? How about Greece, the economically depressed country of Greece?
Greece itself.
Is that not based on ancient Greek values?
Greece has reached its independence from the imperialist Islamic Empire, which suppressed it only 100 years ago. How can you compare that?
100 years ago? So yeah. I'm just trying to understand, like, where these values that are so magical, that bring progress and development. So many of these countries that I'm bringing you as an example, and you always have an excuse like, oh, it was Orthodox Christianity doesn't lead to success and progress that's found in Eastern Europe. Only Catholicism and Protestantism is Western values. No,
that's not the West. The West is the West. The West is not the East. The West is the West.
Yeah. So why? What's the success of the West based on? And you're saying that it's Greek philosophy, Western Christianity and Catholicism and Protestantism and Enlightenment values, like these three things that have very little to do with each other and come from completely different time periods and historical context, somehow magically is a secret formula that brings progress. So that means the rest of the world that didn't have Christianity for 2,000 years and didn't have the influence of the church, then they can't ever have the success of the West. Is that what you're saying?
That's not what I said. No, that's absolutely.
Well, that's why I asked you. What would you attribute that success to? And you're mentioning 2,000 years of Christianity. So what's the magic formula?
I'm saying that Western values have made the West better. Have made the West great. In fact, I would say that Enlightenment values, which only happened within the last few centuries, are largely responsible for how the West has developed since then. And even before that, the separation of Western countries into a unity of Christian nations, but separated into nation states, also built on very old, very ancient philosophical ideas, have helped the West develop in a very great way. But Enlightenment values have definitely made the West much better than it is. But I don't understand the point. The question here was to compare Western liberalism to Islamic society, whereas Western liberalism is something that is that has a history of like 200, 300 years, and Islamic society
you're saying
right there. That was the comparison. I don't understand.
The comparison is that you're saying that I'm asking you, what is the success of the West based on? And you just waffle. First you say that it's 2,000 years of Christian history, then ancient Greece. Now you're saying liberal values. So liberal values exist and have existed in the global South, within these developing countries for generations, right? Partly because they were colonized, so they were forced to adopt those kinds of values in South America, Eastern Europe, Africa, and a lot of Asia. So those values were imposed, and they're still, after many generations, over 100 years, they haven't seen the kind of development and quality of life that the West enjoys. So your explanation that it's the values that leads to prosperity is fundamentally undermined by that reality. If you want to say that, okay, fine, it's not just liberal values, there's also Christianity, the history of the Catholic Church, that also leads to progress that the West developed under, then that means the rest of the world can never achieve development and that quality of life because they don't have 2,000 years of Christian history. So does the West have a responsibility to allocate resources to all of these other developing countries, all of these people who don't have the privilege of a 2,000-year Christian history? Should the West continue to dominate them and have this kind of force? Here, answer this question. Is this world better? A world where the West is in a position of complete dominance? Is that a happier world, or a world where the West redistributes all of its wealth to everyone else and raises the quality of life of everyone to an equal level across the globe through forced redistribution? Which one is a happier world? Can you answer that question?
I don't know. That's a very different scenario that I...
It's a simple question. Just answer the simple question. Which one's happier? Which one's happier?
How is it a simple question?
Which one's no, it's simple. Happier. The West having all the resources, or 90% of the wealth of the world in the hands of the West, and everyone else having to deal with the scraps and the crumbs of the West. Is that a happier world, or a world where everything is distributed equally over all countries for all people? Which one's a happier world?
I don't know. Maybe it would be.
Oh, you don't know now. Oh, okay.
I don't know. Maybe it would be if the West distributes everything equally to the rest of the world. Maybe it would be if the West dominates and the others just follow suit.
Oh, so domination can lead to a better, happier result. I thought you were a utilitarian.
No, that's not what I mean by that. What I mean, I don't understand what that has to do with our discussion.
It's point. Okay. It's okay. Don't worry about it.
I seriously don't understand how this has to do with what this has to do with the point. I don't get it.
Yes, you're saying that.
Your question was what makes liberal Western society better, and why are other cultures not as good as Western society? And then you started talking about how, according to my thought, because I agree that Western society is happy, I must also logically argue that other cultures which don't follow the ideals of Western society can't be equally happy, which is not true, because I said the opposite at the very beginning. I gave Japan as an example. Japan might be, to a certain extent, under the influence of a Western worldview due to what happened after the Second World War, but it is far off Western culture and the Western idea of liberalism and the Western idea of religion and tradition. I don't
understand. Yeah, I know. It was a fascist empire. The Japanese history, Japan was a fascist empire. They lost in World War II. Yeah, they're racist, so they had all that progress that you're now citing as an example from fascism and racism. So why aren't those values being adopted by the rest of the world? Why should liberal values, if progress, you're citing Japan and the West, if that's the ultimate goal, then why shouldn't fascism and racism be adopted as opposed to this liberal enlightenment thought? I'm just trying to draw out the implications of the answers that you're giving. That's all my questions are based on.
I see. We're going into a completely different line of thoughts here, but I don't think Japan is a very good comparison to this whole issue, because Japan is the whole philosophy, the whole idea behind the nation of Japan is that Japan is a glorious nation which was divinely created by the gods, and that the Japanese people are the superior, the divine kind on earth, which deserve to eventually rule over the rest of the world. That was the entire idea of Japan. The problem with comparing Japan to cultures like Europe, for example, is that Japan wasn't in constant interaction with other races and other cultures. Japan was among each other and had a system among each other. Japan started booming, especially after the Second World War, after their system was defeated and crushed, and they have started adopting a more Western style of living, and focused on getting rid of tradition and focusing on simple productivism.
So yeah, that Western system was opposed because the U.S. took over their government and their economy after World War II.
It was imposed. That's true. Yeah, it was imposed.
Yeah, so their progress and their quality of life reached the level it did before World War II because of values that are very different than liberalism. That's the only point I was making. So it's not liberalism that's leading to progress.
Well, the U.S. even imposed values on them 100 years or at least half a century before the Second World War. So we could argue about that forever, but I'm not here to argue. That this is the thing. You might have argued with other people that they argue against imposing Islam on other societies and dominating other cultures, but they might be falling into a hypocrisy because they themselves believe that values should be imposed on other cultures. I don't believe that. I don't believe that we should be imposing liberalism or we should be imposing our own values on different cultures. That's not what I believe at all. I don't think that Brunei or that Saudi Arabia or that other cultures should be forced invaded and forced to change their system if they are oppressive. I believe that Brunei, for example, can be forced by cutting off relationships and cutting off trade with them and saying, hey, if you want to communicate with us and trade with us, then you have to abide by basic human rights that we have established. If you don't abide by these, then we have nothing to do with you. And that I don't think is considered forcing. But I don't personally believe that we should be forcing liberalism or any ideas of freedom on other cultures. That's not what I believe in at all.
Well, I mean, this is the contradiction, right? This is the contradiction, that you're singing the praises of the advanced West that has living a wonderful quality of life, but that quality of life came about through brutal imperialism, brutal colonization, brutal genocide, stealing the resources. That's how you get the West with 90% of the resources of the entire world. It's through coercion, through force, through rape and genocide. And now you're sitting and praising this civilization, but then sitting back with this mealy-mouthed kind of excuse. I don't agree with imposing values. That's completely inconsistent.
No, I believe that the West is in liberalism and Enlightenment ideas. The West has found a great system, which is based on the whole idea of finding out what is true and guaranteeing human happiness by certain means, like slowly making progress. That's actually a core idea of liberalism, which we should have talked about long ago. The core idea of liberalism is that we should slowly make gradual progress, which is why people have different ideas 200 years ago and different ideas now. That is what we're pursuing, and it goes very well. I'm sorry, it is going much better than any system in the world so far.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's a miracle. Like it's such an amazing system that it's led to unprecedented amounts of wealth and dominance. Yeah, it's such an amazing system. But it's like such an amazing system that other countries in the world that adopt the system, for some reason, aren't able to achieve progress, aren't able to achieve the same quality of life. What a mystery. Why is that? Why aren't these values, this magical formula of Enlightenment values, why isn't Mexico? Why isn't Brazil? Why aren't these other countries, Argentina, Ukraine, all of these countries around the world who are liberal and have the same kinds of values, experiencing the same progress and enlightenment and enrichment of quality of life that these Western countries are experiencing? It's such a big mystery. It's just one of those questions that we'll never know. We'll never know.